Hello, I'm Nora and welcome back to Novels with Nora. Today, I thought it would be fun and hopefully informational, maybe, for me to go over my top 20 favorite books of all time. The last video that I posted was a book tag, the get to know my taste book tag, so that anyone could get to know more about me and what I like to read. And I was thinking while filming that, editing it, and doing all that there are so many books that I feel like have truly just made me who I am, and I want to talk about them. So today I am going to be going over my top 20 favorite books of all time, with the disclaimer that this list changes quite frequently because every time I read a new favorite book, it has to get added to the list, but the list is only the top 20. So when something new gets added, something has to get bumped out. You see how that works? And this list is ranked. So number one is my top favorite book. And I think number one will be surprising to some people. This list was honestly really fun for me to put together because it really made me think about what books are truly my favorites and why they are. And so I'm going to go through the list starting at 20 and working our way up to number one. So my least favorite of the favorites and then my most favorite of the favorites. And I'm really excited to share them with you. However, do not expect an eloquent description of these books because I love them so much. I feel like anytime I try to adequately describe what they are, I just end up, oh, I love this book so much. So what I decided I would do instead of just describing the book, I am going to tell you why I love it and why it's a favorite. So there might be a few descriptors of the plot, but mostly it's going to be, I love this book because of such and such, or I love this book because it made me feel a certain way. So that's what you can expect from this video. And if that sounds interesting to you, stick around. So let's just dive in and get started with number 20, The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrefer. This book I read kind of a while ago when I was really getting into books set in space, my space books as I call them. And I love this one because it had me second guessing everything. I never once throughout my reading experience of this knew what was going to happen next, because I don't want to give too much away because my favorite part of this is a huge spoiler for the book, but oh my god, if you've read this, you know what I'm talking about. Gagged. Truly, this book had me gagged from page one. And I remember it being okay, this is kind of weird, and then all of a sudden I was oh, this is real freaky, but in the most wonderful, unique way possible. And a sequel just came out, The Brightness Between Us, and I'm really looking forward to reading that. It takes place a few years after this one, so I'm really looking forward to that. But this really just deepened my love for books set in space, and this is one of the first queer books set in space that I read, so obviously it had to make an appearance on this list. This, genuinely really enjoy this, highly recommend it if you're looking for weird sci-fi, but also a story about humanity and love. This will do that for you. At number 19, we have Court of the Undying Seasons by A.M. Strickland. And this is not the only time that you'll see A.M. Strickland on this list. They're one of my favorite authors. And this book in particular, I like their other book that I read, which you'll see later, more than this one. But this one made me realize that maybe I do like vampire books. Yeah, so this one I love because it's vampires in a way that I've never read before. And granted, I haven't read that many vampire books, but this was really fantastic. And there were little crumbs placed throughout where I was I feel like this is going to circle back to something in the end. And it did. And it was wow. And it did, but in a way that it was I knew that we were circling back to this, but not in this way. And I just remember really loving the intricacies of the world building in this novel. And also our characters were just so fantastic. And the reveals, yeah. Really love this one. This is number 19. At number 18, we have She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And this book really got me into higher adult fantasy. I read this around the time where it first came out, which is rare for me. And I just remember being I have not read anything like this before. And I love how complex and intricate it was, which is something I think you're going to notice with this. Is I really love complex, interesting, really detailed world building and plots. And this did it for me. This, I also believe, is based on a true story. Could be wrong, but it also really cemented to me that I absolutely love fantasies inspired by other cultures or based on other cultures, and this absolutely does that. And this reading, it at times felt like I was reading an actual account of history, but then at other times I was oh no, this is fantasy. And I really loved how it wove the two together. So this is number 18, and I really loved it, and I cannot wait to pick up the sequel, He Who Drowned the World. So that also reminds me, when there is a book on this list that's part of a series, just assume I'm including the whole series in that grouping. But there's absolutely no way that I could rank the inclusions in a series, like the books in a series, ranked within this list, because then it would just be like a whole series altogether. So if one book in a series or duology or trilogy is included, just assume that I'm referring to the entire series. Okay. At number 17, we have Year of the Reaper by Makia Lucier. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. And this is the first book that I can really remember genuinely really enjoying from a male main character perspective, because our main character is a boy, crazy. And I don't read a lot of books from the perspective of a man. And this was really interesting. I also really loved the plague aspect, and this is definitely fantasy, but I would say it's like a lower fantasy because there's like no magic or anything, but I really loved it for its characters, and it's like a journey that you go on with these characters. And I just really loved it, especially with like the like court machinations and everything that was going on from the perspective of outside the court. And I really enjoyed that. And again, really loved the plague aspect. And there is like an animal companion that I really loved in here. And also not the first time that you will see this author on this list, but this is Year of the Reaper. At number 16, we have Alone Out Here by Riley Redgate. And this was pitched as Lord of the Flies in space. And yeah, it is. My brother read this one and he was like, I don't see how this is a 5-star for you. And I'm like, yeah, that's the difference in our reading taste, because I love some like nasty little teenagers really just like struggling to survive and like grappling with their humanity. And that's this. These teens like get sent to space kind of accidentally, and they think that like Earth has exploded. So they're thinking that they're all that's left. And the way that they each and also in groups kind of decide to go about what to do next, highly fascinating. And also this was this author's debut novel, and I was like gagged. Again, I love a space novel. You're gonna see quite a few on this list, but this one was really different because first of all, the ending, it's gonna get you. And also it was focused on teens. So it's a YA novel, but it felt very like it had adult themes of like survival and humanity, but at the same time, like they were kids and they felt like kids, and I really enjoyed that. So Alone Out Here by Riley Redgate. At number 15, I have Strike the Zither by Joan He. I just read this one last year and absolutely fell in love with this duology. The second one is Sound the Gong right over there, and this I really loved, again for like the complex world building, again based off of, I'm not sure if it's a true story or different like mythology that is happening here, but I really loved the world building that we have here. And I especially loved the strategy, like the war strategy in here, because our main character Zephyr is a war strategist, and I really loved how she talked about like the different stratagems and the different techniques she was using to try and win the war for her warlordess. And I really loved reading about that, on top of her like reconnecting with her sister and like finding love in this war-torn world. And again, the war strategy in here is really what did it for me, and I absolutely loved it. And I think I honestly like Sound the Gong a little bit more than Strike the Zither, just because it really like deepens the plot and we get like some resolutions, but really love this duology. At number 14, I have In the Ravenous Dark, again by A.M. Strickland. I said that this author would be making another appearance on this list. This is the first book that I read from this author, and it blew my socks off, let me say. I remember reading it and being kind of confused at points, but like in a really good way, because like, I know it sounds bad to say that you were confused when reading a book, but it wasn't the writing's fault. It was that I'd never read anything like this before, and I just remember reading it and being like, oh, this is what a book could be like. Because I read this one quite a while ago, and I just remember feeling like, wow, this is what I want my books. This is the feeling I want my books to give me. So that's really exciting. And also, this is the first book I read where it was like a love triangle. However, they all ended up together in the end. I know. And also the magic system was super interesting, as well as like the court politics, this time from like the actual court. And I really enjoyed this. And it was just, again, I've never read anything similar to this, and I don't think I ever will. But this really just had me in a chokehold for a very long time. I went out and I bought a special edition because genuinely I mean, first of all, beautiful. And also, I still have not read anything that even comes close to being anywhere similar to this. It just really like knocked my socks off, because I had no clue what I was getting when I was going. I think I read it from my library because I knew that it was queer, and so I went into it knowing next to nothing, and I think that's part of why I was a little confused. I was like, oh, they're connected how? But this, amazing. Again, have not read anything even remotely similar to this, and I don't know that I ever will. And even if I do, I don't know that it will ever compare to, again, the way it made me feel, because I was heart pounding, edge of my seat, like, oh my god, what is going to happen here, and like, how is it going to happen? gagged. I love this book. Coming in at number 13 is Chlorine by Jade Song, and this is the only book that I don't own, simply because I read it from my school's library and just have not found a copy for me to buy. Like, I could buy it online, but like that's not fun. I like to go out and find my books, you know? And I have not been able to find this one, but this I picked up because I had seen someone on BookTube, I think, talking about it, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll pick it up. I don't know if I didn't fully pay attention to what they were saying about it, but I had no clue that that's what it was. It's like mermaids in the most freaky way possible, but also in like the most queer and loving way possible. And I just really loved the themes in this book, and I loved our main character. Can't remember her name, but I absolutely loved her and how she like so firmly believed in things, and how she had friends, who loved her so much that they were willing to just kind of let her do her own thing. And again, really like the themings, really like the way it made me feel. And I still think about this book, mainly because it like had some scenes that like will stick with you whether you want them to or not, but also because it was like so heartfelt. I think that's a theme you'll see here, is like some of these books are kind of freaky and weird, but also incredibly heartfelt and like full of love at the same time. And that's what Chlorine is, like at its soul, is just full of love. And so that's why it's here. At number 12, I have the Traitor's Circle trilogy. This is Traitor's Kiss, the first book. I started reading this book in high school, I want to say, like early high school, like my freshman year of high school. And I remember that I picked it up from my library and I pre-ordered the third book, Traitor's Kingdom, and it sat on my shelf for at least 3 or 4 years before I picked it up, because I was devastated to know that that was going to be the end. Like, I would never have any more story of these characters. Sage, our main character, is one of my favorite main characters that I've ever read. She so firmly believes in like doing the right thing and like a sense of justice, and also stands so firmly in her own beliefs. She like apprentices for a matchmaker, but then the matchmaker is also like scheming for the whole kingdom in like a good way to like make things work out well for everybody. And so Sage gets like embroiled into all of this like politics and like political scheming, and like it's not quite what she bargained for, but at the same time she ends up being really good at it, and she like embraces it, but also hesitantly, because she's like, a lot of conversations in here are about like people who really enjoy politics and want to be politicians should not be politicians because they are the people who are doing it for their own gain, where people who are like more hesitant to get into politics are the ones you want in charge of things because they really have like everyone's best interest at heart. And Sage is just, I love her so much as a character because she's so sage, like wise, but at the same time, like she's still just a kid, and like you see that come in with like a lot of the like situations she gets put in. She's like, no, I know what I need to do, but I don't like the way that makes me feel. And I really love this, like the whole trilogy. The author, Erin Beatty, was in the military, and so a lot of like the military plotting here feels like very real and very scary, and also just like very accurate as far as I can imagine. I've never been in the military, but it's just amazing. The love interest, Sage and Alex, are like my favorite fictional couple ever. And I was devastated to finally pick up that last book. Like, I loved it a lot, don't get me wrong, but knowing that I would never have any more content from these characters was devastating, because they've been with me through so much of my life that finally like closing like the last page of that book was like, wow, like a whole era of my life is like bookmarked by these books. And so I think part of what puts them so high on this list is nostalgia, because like when I was rereading this, I recognize that some of the writing isn't like the best, but the plot and the characters just far outweighs anything that could ever be wrong with that, because these books are my babies. Like, I love them so unbelievably much. Also, they're stunning. All of the covers have like a different item with flowers, and then the naked spines of the books have like the flowers foiled on there. Gorgeous. But yeah, these books, and I never see like anyone else talking about them. I remember there was this one time, again, I have a lot of memories attached to this book, but I remember this one time I was sitting in my sophomore history class, and a girl who was sitting in the aisle across from me was reading this book, and I went up to her and I was like, oh my god, I love those books. She was like, yeah, I'm just starting them, it's so good. And I just remember being like, wow, books can really like be a connection. And that was like the first time I realized, oh my god, I can connect to people based on the books I love. And that, I think, is where a lot of my love for this book comes from, is because it's just tied to such amazing memories and feelings. So please pick up these books. Again, they are fantastic. The writing in the beginning, especially of the first book, does feel a little bit juvenile, but trust me, it gets so much better as the series goes on. And it just gets to a point where you're like, I don't know how anyone can think this up, because like there's like battles and wars that are being waged here, and the way that they're written is like, I don't know how anyone is thinking up like this war strategy, again with the strategy, but truly I just was amazed reading these books. So that's why they're here on this list. I think you'll start to realize that as we get higher in the list, closer to number 1, I have more and more to say, because the books that are higher just like mean so much to me. And that is very much true of our next book, Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. This is number 11 here, so we're getting really close to the top. But Three Dark Crowns, this whole series, there's 4 books in this series, and I love them all so much. We follow 3 twin sisters, or 3 triplet queens, and they all have like their own power, but as we come to find out, things are not quite as they seem. And again, I just love these characters so much because they are all meant like to fight to the death until one sister is remaining, and then she becomes like the queen of the entire kingdom. But these 3 take a turn and realize that they don't want to kill each other because they actually have a chance to get to know each other, unlike any of the queens before them. And they realize we kind of like being sisters, like we don't want to kill each other. And I just remember the powers and like the magic system here was super fascinating because the sister who ends up being queen, the whole magic of like her people gets strengthened while the magic of the other 2 sisters who die weakens. And so obviously it's like a big thing for that sister to win. And I just remember reading it, and it's like you want all 3 of them to win because you love all 3 of them so much, and you love all the people, like all of their friends and their family and everything. But you also know that like that's not gonna happen. My favorite queen is Queen Katarine. If you've read it, let me know who your favorite is because gagged. All of their stories just take such drastic, violent turns, but then the ending was just so bittersweet and just so perfect for these characters. And again, there's 4 books in this series. I read them like when the first one came out all the way through to the end. So they've been with me for a lot of my life. And Kendara Blake made a sneaky little announcement on her Instagram that she's working on a 5th book. I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know. But these books truly just, the magic system, and again, like the court politics, but very interesting because we have 3 different factions that are all vying for power, and they're all doing it in very different ways because they're all coming from different seats of power. So like our poisoner queen, Katarine, the poisoners have been in power for a really long time. And so seeing them like fighting to maintain their power while the other 2 are fighting to grab power, it's very interesting. But also like because of the way that their powers are, like the naturalists are kind of just like, we're fine like without it. Like if you win, cool, but we're mostly just going to be sad that you're gone, not so much sad that we didn't gain power. And like that kind of ties into how their powers work with being naturalists and having their powers tied to like the land and animals and things. And I just really loved the magic system in this book. Like again, have not read anything similar to it and don't think that I will because it's just so unique. Like even if there's something that like has like queens like or like sisters or whatever fighting for the throne, the magic system won't be the same, the characters won't be the same, because genuinely the characters in this book are what like are the driving force of it outside of like the magic and the politics and everything. And I love it so much. Give this one a chance. I promise it will stun you, it will wow you, and it will keep you reading through all 4 books. There's also a little like novella that has different stories of like queens of the past. Also fantastic. I just love like the lore of the queens here. I need to stop talking about this one so we can move on, but yeah, really love this series. With that, we are now in the top 10. Woo! So number 10, we go back to my space books with Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This book, I have a funny story about this one. So when I worked at the academic library on my college campus, some of my supervisors did a display where you could like they made like a whole tree and you could put like little apples with your favorite book up on the tree. And I had asked my one supervisor to grab me one so I could write it. She was like, oh, what are you going to put? Dead Silence? And that's exactly what I was going to put because at the time this was and still is one of my all-time favorite books. It's just, I feel like this genre is something that like has to try 10 times harder to make it one of my like top favorite books, but this is still number 10. Like my 10th favorite book of all time, still pretty high. So this I loved because it did exactly what I want a space horror to do. They were confined in this space where like what was happening, genuinely horrifying, but it being in space made it 10 times more scary. And that's what I want. I want the setting of it being in space to add to the horror, not be the horror. And this I really loved because we switch back and forth between 2 timelines. We follow the same character the whole time. We're in her head. However, the timelines are like, so we follow her as she is going onto this ship with her team because the ship is like, it was kind of like the Titanic, but like it was a spaceship. And all of a sudden, like they just like lost contact with it, and like a whole bunch of rich people were on there and they just lost contact with it. No one ever had heard it or seen it or heard from them again. And her team are like scavengers almost, where they can kind of like go on to different things, like different ships and planets, and bring things back and then sell them. And they're out going on a different mission, and then they come across the ship and they're like, well, let's just go on it. Like, let's just grab a few things. Like, even if we just get like a faucet, we can make so much money. And she's like, I don't know, I'm getting a bad feeling. She should have listened to that feeling. But so following her as she's like embarking onto the ship and like exploring it, and following her in like the present timeline where she's off of the ship and bad things have happened, and she's like working with a therapist to like work through it because they're trying to figure out what happened to her crew. And it just takes so many turns, and like genuinely I had chills reading this. Like this is the first like horror novel that I've read where I felt genuinely scared while reading it, because the things that happen in here, and then the way it's like described, it's like, oh, so this like could happen. Yeah, horrifying, but I really loved it. Again, it made me feel like genuine fear. Like even just thinking about it now, I'm like getting chills again because it was so scary. Yeah, this is my favorite space horror novel of all time. Carrying on in a similar vein, we have Contagion and its sequel Immunity by Erin Bowman. And these books I found when I was searching like space horror novels, books set in space, scary books set in space, trying desperately to find anything. And I found this, and my local library had it, and I was like, oh, I'll pick it up. Changed my life. Changed my life, let me tell you. So these books are like, they're set in space, but it has more of like a zombie twist to it, where they're like these creatures that like go dormant until they smell new blood that they can get, and then they like come alive and they try and get you. And it being set in space, like there really is no escape. Like health is light years away being the tagline. Yeah, because again, being in space adds to the horror elements, but is itself not the horror. And this does that so perfectly, and I love the sequel. Again, because it's a series, just assume I'm talking about both of them, but it has really great conversations about greed and how people in power are willing to do anything and decimate anyone to like get money and power. And really like not what I thought that this book was gonna have to say, but it was really fantastic. And also it just like Thea and Cohen, our two main characters, are so fantastic. Like Thea, her drives for why she does what she does and like why she is where she is so fantastic. And I just, again, for being a YA novel, it feels much older, but the characters still feel young. Like I don't really know how to explain it, but like the theming and the conversations feel very adult and very mature, while the characters still feel their age and still act their age. And that's something I really love about this. And again, have not found anything similar to this, because it's like zombies in space with so much else. And I just really love this one. This whole duology is just really fantastic. And again, I don't see anyone talking about this, maybe because it is older, but it's really fantastic. I highly recommend this one. Excuse the horrible lighting. It is like thunderstorming. However, I realized I completely forgot to talk about book number 8. Not sure how I managed to do that, but book number 8 is The Dead in the Dark by Courtney Gould, one of my favorite books, and so I'm really not sure how I managed to completely skip over it. But this follows Logan, our main character, and her dads are like TV ghost hunters, and they have to like go back to their hometown of Snakebite, Oregon. And I don't remember if this is what draws them there, but they end up there because, well, they end up there and there is a missing teen, and like something has got him, you know? It is paranormal. And Logan and then the girlfriend of the boy who goes missing end up kind of like falling for each other and like solving the mystery of what's going on. And it says, Courtney Gould's thrilling debut is about the things that lurk in dark corners and the parts of you that can't remain hidden, and about finding home in places and people you didn't expect. And I very much agree. This is like a very quiet novel. Like it's definitely like ghost and like paranormal in that way, and like kind of like honestly kind of scary, but also like when you really get to like the heart of the novel, it's like very quiet, and it is about like finding home and like coming to terms with who you are and realizing that, like, I think the dedication says something about, like, love holds back the dark, and it's just, it's so very wonderful, and, like, a very quiet novel, but also they're, like, fighting ghosts and, like, dealing with this big paranormal thing, and, like, the small town that they're in is, like, not the most welcoming to Logan and her dads, because they're dads, so, like, they're two men married to each other, and Logan is, I don't remember if she's a lesbian, but she definitely likes women, and so she's dealing with, like, all of that happening in this small town, and just realizing that, like, who she loves does not make her, like, a bad person or anything, and it's just, like, a really wonderful book. All of Courtney Gould's books are super fantastic, and, like, are very quiet and, like, kind of slow going, but you finish it and you're just like, wow, like, I can't believe someone wrote that. Like, the plots that she uses as, like, devices for the messaging that she's trying to use are really fantastic. And again, debut novel, really fantastic. And she has 2 more novels out that I've read one of them, Where Echoes Die, and I cannot wait to read What the Woods Took. But yeah, The Dead in the Dark by Courtney Gould. I really don't know how I managed to completely skip over this. At number 7, we have a book I read just earlier this year, Dragon Fruit, also by Makia Lucier. And let me tell you, this book had me just feeling so many emotions, most of them just like pure joy and happiness while reading it, because while there are high stakes, just like the feelings that this book brings me are just, even just thinking about it, like there's just like a smile coming to my face because it's so beautiful, beautifully written, beautifully described, like everything just feels so lush and just beautiful. Like, that's the word that I would use to describe this book. If I only had to use one, it would be beautiful. And this I really loved because it does feature dragons, and that's something that I love in books, but in a way that I've never seen done before, because they're sea dragons. And so like there's people who hunt the dragons, and then our main character Hanalei, she has like a connection with the dragons, and I really love that aspect of it, and how they came to understand the dragons more and like appreciate them and not just see them as like a tool to be used. And I really loved that. And again, there's animal companions in here, there's magic, but like in a very subtle way that I really loved. It also had amazing Pacific Islander representation. This won like a whole bunch of awards to the American Library Association, and it's like rightfully deserved. The representation in here was so beautiful and like beautifully written. If you have not read anything by this author, highly recommend it. And this is a great place to start because it's super fantastic, and I think anyone who picks it up would get something out of it. And I absolutely loved it. Like, I had the biggest smile on my face while reading it, was like genuinely concerned for these characters, and like when it ended, I was like, this is like the perfect ending for them. Like, part of me was like, I want so much more. Like, you could write like a whole 900-page novel just about these characters going about their daily lives. But the way it ended, I was like, no, this is like the perfect ending for them, and it feels very true to them. Like, I feel like I know them, and I just love this so much, because while the writing and the plot was amazing, the characters are really the heart of this novel, and I loved it so much. And I feel like you can tell that the author really loved writing it and like really loves her culture, and she put all of that love into this novel, and you can feel it. You really can. At number 6, we have a behemoth of a novel, The Prior of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. It took me forever to actually start reading this book and then to finish it, because it's huge, and also just the reading experience with a novel this big in hardcover, you know, not like the most pleasant physical reading experience, but this book spans so much like geographical space as well as just like time. This is the type of novel that really makes me question how authors do it and what kind of magic they have that they're able to do things like this, because this is like almost like a history like textbook of this world that Samantha Shannon created, and I just don't know how she was able to create these characters and this plot and this giant ever expanding world and make everything feel so small and like easily digestible. If you are worried about this one being like super intimidating because of how big it is, that is the only thing you have to be intimidated about, because trust me, once you start reading it, there's like maps and there's family trees and there's like a whole bunch of things in the book that like help you understand what you're reading, that makes it a super smooth reading experience. It's a very big book. That's really the only thing that should ever hold you back from reading this, because it is one of the most detailed, lush, just so incredibly wonderful fantasy books I've ever read. Again, has dragons, but in an evil but also wonderful way. And I just really love the characters in this, especially I love when it's a fantasy novel that is focused on like a queendom and like a matriarch, and this, yeah, that's that. And I love the magic system in here and just the characters and the way they connect and they come together and come apart. Just so much happens in this novel, and it really will give you like a whiplash. You'll finish it and you'll be like, how is that only one book that I read? Like, how am I supposed to continue on with my life after finishing this? Like, yeah, it's one of those books. So again, highly recommend. I know it's big, I know it's intimidating, you just gotta do it. And I'm talking to myself here too, because I have A Day of Fallen Night. I have 2 copies of it actually, and I have yet to read it. But I need to get back into this world. I'm so excited. Also, Samantha Shannon is writing Among the Burning Flowers, which is a Prior of the Orange Tree, Roots of Chaos, which is like the series name novel. And it's only gonna be like 250 some pages, which is going to be a really great entryway into this world. So keep your eye out for that, because if you're wanting to get into this, but you're intimidated by the size and you're just like not sure if you want to commit, maybe start there. It's not out yet. I don't know when it comes out, but maybe start there. But yeah, really, really love this one. Pulling my sleeves up to get into our top 5. I am getting myself all worked up, but our number 5 novel is The First Sister and the whole trilogy by Lyndon A. Lewis. I have not read The Last Hero, the conclusion to the trilogy yet, because I, again, don't want the series to end, but oh my god, this book. This is one that I really struggle with describing because it spans so much, just like so much, and it's set in space. It is definitely a space opera, so if that's not your thing, completely understand why this wouldn't be your thing. But the characters that we have here and the way that they are like ruthless but also like to their own ends is just so wonderful. And we follow so many characters, especially from like the first book to the second book. We add more POVs, but they all like weave together to make like this perfect story, and we follow so many different perspectives and different plot lines, I guess, because each character is like really doing their own thing, but they all come together in a way that leaves you being like, how does one plot this out? Again, I feel like that's something I'm gonna have to say for like all of these top 5 books, but like, how do the authors do this? This is the thing that makes me think that like authors are magicians, because how did Lyndon A. Lewis, first of all, come up with this idea, and second of all, make sure that everything that they were plotting all came together and worked so perfectly? I'm not sure, but I love this trilogy so much. The first and second books were both 5 stars for me. I love them so much. I love the conversations about like racism and colonialism that we're having, but like they're like technically aliens, so it's super interesting. All the different planets that we go to have like very different cultures, and there's just a lot of conversations about like capitalism and like capitalistic greed as well. Really love this series. At number 4, I have the Twin Crowns trilogy by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Weber, and they're actually sisters-in-law, and I think it's so fun that they wrote a novel together. And also I just think it's fun to read a novel that's written by 2 people but reads as like one perfectly seamless novel. I don't know if their writing styles are just so similar, their editor did a wonderful job, but this I actually got an arc of this. I don't think you can see it, but it's right up here. I had got an arc of this sent to me when I was still in high school, and I read the arc before the novel came out and was like, how have I not heard of this? How is no one talking about this? Why is everyone not talking about this? Because it's amazing. The magic system where we have like different kinds of witches, and the different types of witches each have their own type of magic, but the way that all the witches work together with their magic to make like almost like one seamless magic system, beautiful. Rose and Wren, who are twins, but at the start of the novel they don't know they're twins, and then they get like separated and have to come back together and work together to make the kingdom the place that they want it to be, because they are like the rightful heirs of the kingdom. It is just so wonderful. And like the 2 love interests, yeah, again we have another animal companion, a wolf. Yeah, the magic system, the way that the sisters are like, they kind of start out hating each other because they come from like opposite worldviews, but then they end up like leaning on each other and like coming to each other and like learning how to live with one another in their lives. It's so wonderful. And like our whole cast of characters is just so amazing, and I don't know what else I can say about this book other than it is beautiful. It is wonderful. Let me actually show you something. This is how much I love these novels. These are the Waterstones exclusive editions that came out for each copy, or like each book. So there's Twin Crowns, Cursed Crowns, and then Burning Crowns. And because it's twins, they did a copy for each twin, and I have them all. And this is just me showing off. But I love this trilogy so much. The magic system, the villain, yeah. The way that everyone has a motive, like even if they're like an evil, dastardly person, they all have a motive that you can kind of be like, you know? And that's something that I really love. Also, just like all of the characters are just so wonderful. The world building is crazy good. I really love this trilogy. And there's 2 confirmed like companion novels coming out about characters who are in the trilogy but are not the main characters, and I'm really looking forward to those because this world is just so amazing, so beautiful, and again there's like lush and yeah, really fantastic. This is YA, and it does read YA because our characters are younger. However, especially as I'm like, I don't want to say aging out of YA because I don't think I ever will, but as I'm gravitating more towards adult novels, I still find myself coming back to this and like wanting to do a reread like almost every week. Honestly, every week I'm looking at it like I could do it. And it reads, yes, YA, but because of how much is happening and just like the way it's written, it, I think, could be read by such a wide age range of people, and everyone will love it. At least I think everyone should love it. I'm getting extra hot and worked up as we enter my top 3. And at number 3, we have, to no one's surprise, Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. If you have seen my January wrap up, or I think it was my first grad school vlog, I talk about this book a lot. This is yet another one of those books that really makes me question how authors do it and just how long it must have taken this author specifically to plot this book and make sure that like every little seed that she planted ends up growing and like working together. Because I remember reading this and there was one scene in particular and I was like, I feel like we're going to circle back to this, but I have no clue how. And then the way it did circle back to that, I was like, this is genius. Like, this is like a pure work of art right here. I don't know how anyone with their own 2 hands is able to craft such a thing. Yeah, this book follows like, honestly, like 3 or 4 different timelines with like completely different characters that all end up intersecting in the end. And also just like throughout the whole thing. And it's just so wonderful. Our narrative voice here is something like, she's so sassy and I just love it so much. There's like footnotes in here that like add to the story. And it feels like something that exists in like a different world, but at the same time is like very much rooted in our own world. And it's just very fascinating. Again, never read anything like it. I remember I asked for recommendations of something similar to this, and someone who had read it, I think this was on Instagram, reached out and they were like, yeah, I read it too, and I have been looking for something similar and have never been able to find anything that even closely compares. So that's where we're at with this one. But yeah, this just, again, I could reread this one right now and I just love it so much because it's one of those things where you read it once and you're like, oh my God, that was absolutely amazing. And you read it again and you're like, there's so much more here than I even picked up on the first time. And I just like, it was really like mind blowing. I've never read anything like this. And I had it sitting on my shelves for years. And when because it's a big book again, but I finally got around to it and I was like, oh my God, like this is a masterpiece. This is truly a work of art. And I realize I'm not explaining anything about this book, but like, I think going in knowing nothing would be better. Just know that you follow a lot of different girlies and they all are doing their own weird little things. And it's devastating and heartbreaking, but also heartwarming at the same time. It's a very bittersweet novel that I just feel like, yeah, she's my baby. I broke the spine when I was reading it though, because I bought this copy secondhand. Yeah, this book is just, it's so amazing. And it's one of those things where like, yes, you follow so many different plot lines and different perspectives and different just like plot narratives all over the place. It'll be like, you're reading a chapter and you're on like one plot line. And then you go to the next chapter and like, it'll end on a cliffhanger, that chapter. And so then you turn to the next chapter and you're like, oh, well, I have to read this to get back to what I was trying to actually find out in the first place. But then that chapter grips you so much that when you finally do get back to it, you're like, but wait, I want to know more about that. And so it just, you cannot put it down once you start reading because everything is so intertwined that you're like, I need to know more. And so yeah, read this one. It might take you a little while, but it is magnificent. Coming in at number 2, we have another novel that will probably not be at all a surprise to you, The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. If you have seen any of my previous videos, you've probably heard me talk about this. I love this book so much. And I had got an arc of The Ashfire King, the sequel that comes out on April 15th. Let me tell you, it just gets better. Like, I love this one so much to the point where I was contemplating moving it up to number 1. Like right now, I'm considering it. I love this book so much. This is like exemplary of everything that I want in a fantasy novel. Like if all my fantasies could be like this, I would be the happiest reader alive. But alas, they cannot be. Not everything can be purely perfect and like a 10, 1500 star read. But this, yeah, something you should know about me. Growing up, I was like a big Disney kid. I love animated movies, and my favorite was Aladdin, and still is Aladdin. And this, I did not know when I picked it up, is based on the same story that Aladdin is based on, because I was reading it and I was like, this feels very familiar. Like we have the person who like dresses up like they're not royalty to sneak in with the commoners, and someone who's like a thief, and like the magic carpet and the lamp and a little animal companion. Only in the second book. But genuinely, it's so fantastic. These characters are just some of the most grounded characters that I've ever read, and I love all of them. I remember reading this one, and there was a character, we have 3 POVs, and I remember one of them, and I was like, this feels random. Like, why are we getting her perspective? Yeah, I know why. And it makes so much sense. Like, everything that happens that you're questioning, like, I feel like we didn't need this. Just wait, because it'll come back around and you will see it. I remember I was reading it and I was talking to my brother. I was like, I feel like I know how it's going to end. Like I can see what like the last section, like last scene of this book is going to be. I just don't know how we're going to get there. And I was so unbelievably wrong. The number of twists that this took before we even got to where I thought we were going to end up was crazy. The twist that it took in the end, so then like changes like how you read the entire book and how the whole rest of the trilogy is going to go is crazy. This magic system is something that is so beautiful, and like the way everything is described is just like, I really feel like I'm there. Like I am there with these characters when I'm reading this book, because again, this is a debut novel. How did she do it? Like writers are just magic. Like I don't know. This book is just really something that is so personal to me, and it feels like she sat down to write this book for me. Something about this just really speaks to me, and it just feels like it was written for me, and I love it so much. Ashfire King comes out on April 15th, and that one tore my heart out. Yeah, I was reading it and I was just like, I just know this is not gonna end well. And we have no news for book 3. It's going to be a trilogy, but there's not a single drop of news about book 3 yet, and that is devastating. But this genuinely is my perfect fantasy novel. Like I don't think I will ever read a fantasy that can beat this one out, because it's everything that I want in a fantasy novel. It's just everything I want in a novel, period. It's just so amazing. This is so amazing, and I just cannot say enough good things about this. Please pick this novel up. My number 1 novel, which is as much of a shock to me as I'm sure it is to you, is Brutes by Diz Tate. This is like a literary fiction novel, which is not at all the genre I typically read. And you've seen my other top 5. They're like mostly like fantasy type, like some weird thing happening type novel. Like fantasy is like my genre. Fantasy and sci-fi are like what I read most. So the fact that this is my number 1, even before I started filming, I was like, does that belong at my number one spot? And it does, because something about this, it was like a little worm and it latched itself into my brain and will not let go. I think about this book almost daily. I read it as a library book and I took so many notes while reading this, and I have so many quotes that I actually need to go through and like highlight in here. But this book, I can't even describe it to you. It's a very short novel. Check the trigger warnings before you pick this one up though, because oh my god, so many things happen in here that like, again, I could not even describe what this book is, because I don't think the plot matters so much as the vibes and the way it makes you feel. Because this book is about girlhood, and it is about girlhood in a way that is devastating and heartbreaking, but also just like so raw and real. And the way that these girls, we follow them as like they're like teenagers and how like what goes on there, and then we also follow them as adults and we see like how their lives turned out, and you just see like so much like whimsy and hope in them as like teenagers, and then when you see them as adults you're like, yikes. Like it just, something about this just like really like nestled right into my heart and has not let go since. I don't know how to explain this to you other than it is about the utter heartbreak of girlhood and just existing as like a teenager in rural Florida, I guess. And it's just, it feels like summer, but like in the most like depressing way possible, which I'm not making this sound very enticing, but yeah, I don't know. It's just something about this just really hooked its little claws into me and has not let me go. I think the last paragraph of the synopsis on the inside of this dust jacket really does this book justice. With a voice that is darkly beautiful and brutally compelling, Diz Tate captures the violence, horrors, and manic joys of girlhood. Brutes is a novel about the seemingly unbreakable bonds in the wee of young friendship in the moment they are broken forever. And yeah, the writing in this is, I think, one of the things that makes it stand out to me so much, because this is, again, a debut novel, but I think this author wrote for like a magazine or something. Like they did like short stories. And yeah, the writing in here is genuinely stunning. There were so many quotes where I was like, this even just on its own is like a beautiful quote, beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. But like in the context of the story, it's just like, oh my god, like these poor girls and then like the women that they grow into. It's just, yeah, this book, it really did something to me. Like it altered my brain chemistry. Like I have not been the same since reading it. Again, I think about it almost daily. Like the word girlhood will be mentioned. I'll be like, Brutes, Diz Tate, read it again. And yeah, I don't even know what else to say other than, I'm not going to say please read this book because it's definitely not for everyone. Definitely not. But it was for me. It really did something to me. And it has stuck with me. I don't know what it did, but it did something. And with that, you have learned about my top 20 favorite novels of all time, with an asterisk that says this list is subject to change at any given time on any whim that I may be experiencing. Because again, like I said at the beginning of the video, anytime I read a new novel that I'm like, oh my god, I love this, it has to go on the list, but then something has to come off the list. And so we're just like in a constant state of flux on this list, truly. I changed some things around right before I started filming, so I was like, Stardust Thief has moved up on the list, because how was it not there originally? I had it originally under Plain Bad Heroines, and I was like, no, it needs to get moved up. But yeah, those are my top 20 favorite books of all time. Have you read any of these? Do you now want to read any of them? I would love to know. What are your top 20 favorite books? I had so much fun making this and just getting to talk about my favorite books because, duh, who wouldn't love doing that? I am sweaty and worked up, but in the best way possible. So I really hope you enjoyed this and that maybe you learned a little bit more about my reading taste. But that is going to be all from me today. So if you did enjoy this, and if you think that we might have reading tastes in common, or you really love some of my favorite books, or you have recommendations for me based on this list, I think you should comment down below, like the video, and subscribe, because that would just be really wonderful and I would love it a lot. So thank you so much for watching this far and listening to me talk about all of my favorite books. And that is going to be all from me today. So thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Toodaloo!